Welcome to another edition of Draft Season right here on Giants.com, the Giants mobile app, and of course, all your favorite podcast platforms. It's not a Giants show, though. It is a draft show, and we got a lot of news over the weekend. My partner in crime is Tony Pauline. You know him from Pro Football Network. I am John Schmeelk. Thanks for being with us, everybody. And Tony, I think we all expected the Bears were getting out of number one. We just didn't know when it was going to happen. News dropped over the weekend. And before we get into it, let's give the fans the parameters of the trade. I'm sure they've heard it already, but let's get all the exact details in. The Bears receive, or rather send out, the number one overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft to the Carolina Panthers. In return, the Bears receive the Panthers' 9th overall pick in the draft, the 61st pick, which is the draft pick the Panthers got from the 49ers in the Christian McCaffrey trade. So that is a late second-round pick, also in the 2023 draft. They also obtain a 2024 first-round pick and a 2025 second-round pick. And then the cherry on top is DJ Moore, who is a very, very good wide receiver, also heading to the Chicago Bears to help out Justin Fields. You can go first, Tony. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are, if I'm a Bears fan today, I'm ecstatic. I mean, they basically moved out of the top spot. They got a haul of picks. They're basically a team in rebuild mode. When you look at where they're selecting now with that 9th slot, when you look at their needs, they can come away with a good offensive tackle. There's a chance Paris Johnson may be there. They need offensive guards. It depends on what you think of Skronsky. He's likely to be there. If I'm a Chicago Bears fan, I'm ecstatic. Now, if I'm a Carolina Panthers fan, I mean, wow, this is exciting that they made the trade, but they're not trading up for a Trevor Lawrence type of quarterback. None of these quarterbacks grade as high as any of many recent quarterbacks that we've seen. Let's be honest. You go back to what year was it? 2016, right? 2016 draft, when you had two trades for teams moving up for Jared Goff and teams moving up for Carson Wentz. Now, let's forget about what we know today. Going back to 2016, can you sit here and tell me that C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young or whoever else are as highly rated, highly graded as either Goff or Wentz were when they were in the draft?
I think Bryce Young was a better college player than either one of those guys.
Hands down, no doubt about it. But we're not talking about college players.
You're right.
Are they higher rated as far as draft prospects? And for Carolina, I think, to me, it just epitomizes how, the league is so quarterback crazy and you got to have the quarterback. They basically gave away, tons of draft capital for guys that are major question marks. And granted, there are always major question marks when you draft a quarterback. But again, none of these guys come close to Trevor Lawrence. And it was a Trevor Lawrence type package, in my opinion, that they gave away.
Yeah, I think there's a million ways to break this down. So let's start with the package first here, Tony. We talked, one thing we kind of discussed over the course of our draft season episodes, where do the Bears maybe trade down twice, right? Do they inch down to 2 or inch down to 4, then inch down again to try to get a little more capital back? But I really think just making the direct move, they got enough. I mean, you got 2 1s, 2 2s, and DJ Moore, who, if you were going to trade for DJ Moore on an island, right? You go to Carolina, I want to trade for DJ Moore. What is Carolina going to ask for? They're going to ask for a first-round pick. That's what they're going to ask for. So they, in effect, got 3 1s, 2 2s. Now, 1 2 is at the very end of the second round. Panthers held on to their own second-round pick, which is obviously a better selection. We'll get into that, too. But I really do think the Bears maximize their value here. And I guess the other question I'll ask you now, too, is there a chance now that even a guy like Jalen Carter could be there at 9, given the off-the-field issues, which is maybe the guy they're targeting anyway?
We don't know. Let's go back to the previous show when we talked about Jalen Carter. We really don't know because the legal issue has to be played out. The legal issue has to be completed. And then the Bears have to decide, the lying to the police and everything, is he trustworthy enough to bring in? He could be gone. He could still be there. The further Jalen Carter falls, obviously the more red flags are. And as I've said before, if these legal issues are not closed out, or it doesn't look like they're going to close out, his draft stock is going to tank.
Yeah, and look, and we also know Bears ownership. I think from what I understand, talking to people that are familiar with the organization, they tend to be somewhat conservative. So I'm not sure if that's something that they'd be a little bit hesitant in terms of going after a player like that. But look, I think the Bears have set themselves up. You got to give Ryan Poles credit. He was their GM hire last year. You go back, you can question that Chase Claypool trade. I'm sure they'd like that back if they could and have that second round pick instead of Claypool. But look, that trade's done. But now you've given Justin Fields a pretty nice set of wide receivers now. I mean, DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, and Chase Claypool. I mean, it's not a top 5 unit, but that's a pretty good 1 through 3 wide receiver wise. They drafted Cole Kmet to play tight end last year. He's a pretty good player. Now you have all these additional picks. Throw in the fact that they lead the NFL in cap space. So look, right now the Bears, Tony, I think number one goal for them is figure out what Justin Fields is, right? What do they have in Justin Fields? Now they put the receivers around them. You mentioned in draft, you have a chance to draft now an offensive tackle if you want in that first round, or Skoronski if you think he can do, center guard, whatever, tackle. And then you can bolster your offensive line in free agency as well. And now you have all this draft capital in 2024 and 2025. If you put all this stuff around Fields and it doesn't work out, you have all these future picks now where you can go get a quarterback next year if you need to. So I really think Ryan Poles has put himself in the best position possible, not only to succeed with Justin Fields, but to pivot if Fields doesn't work out.
I think they know what Fields is by virtue of this trade. I mean, how much talk, and I never bought into it, was, they're going to trade Justin Fields and take a quarterback with that first pick, even though none of those quarterbacks were really rated as highly as Justin Fields entering the draft.
Did you have Fields graded higher than all these guys?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at, his sophomore season, junior season was a little bit down. He had that great game against Clemson. I mean, it was a phenomenal game against Clemson in the semifinal game. I thought he was terrific. The one problem with Fields, and I remember breaking that story, that was the COVID year at the Senior Bowl, was teams thought he were concerned he doesn't read defense as well. We'll have to see how that plays out. Now, obviously they got to protect him. You mentioned the receivers. You mentioned the tight end. Now they got to, and that's their number one need. And like you said, I mean, I hate to think that, well, if Justin Fields fails, you can use one of these future multiple first round picks to get a quarterback or move up to get a quarterback. But you are absolutely right when you say that. Again, from a Bears point of view, I thought it was masterful. I didn't think that there was I really didn't believe that there was going to be a huge market for that first pick, because I was not a big believer in these quarterbacks. We've gone through it all time and time again, the holes in these guys, the concerns with these guys. Obviously, I was wrong. That market was there for Carolina, and the Bears, they got all this draft capital. Now they have to use it correctly. We saw what happened with the Raiders with all that draft capital they got for Khalil Mack, and they got nobody. I mean, they got the running back, Josh Jacobs, is basically the only one left. So now it's a matter of using that draft capital correctly, making proper choices, and getting not just filling needs, but getting good players.
Yeah, and really building up your franchise. So I'm with you, Tony. Let's look at now this from the Panthers' perspective. And look, I don't know. I don't cover the team, but listening to what I have about from people that do, I got to imagine this is an ownership-driven trade. I feel like, and look, I get it. They've been it's not quite the Indianapolis Colts on the quarterback carousel, but, you tried with Sam Darnold. You tried with Baker Mayfield. And maybe doing it on the cheap is the wrong way to put it, but it's certainly not the huge investment in the quarterback spot. And I think they've basically said, Scott Fitterer and Tepper, the owner, are basically like, look, if you want to win in this league, and you said it, the league's quarterback obsessed, and understandably so, is the most important position on the field. We have to go make a big investment here and try to go get that quarterback. And they went out and did that. Now, unfortunately, I like the Panthers' offensive line. I think it's pretty good, right? I think Ike Ekwonu made some progress last year. Moton's a good right tackle. They got a pretty good defense, but now you've stripped your wide receiver core a little bit with DJ Moore. You kind of have to build that up from scratch. You still have that second-round pick that should help with that. And now you're going to put a quarterback in a situation where my sense is, Tony, and this is when we can start having fun now and figuring out who the Panthers are going to pick. I sense the owner is a swing for the fences type of guy, but if you're stripping all this down and you think you have a pretty good product and roster already, and I do think the Panthers roster is pretty good. I don't think it's a bad roster. Do you want to pick a project here, or do you want to pick a guy that maybe you can put in a little bit quicker to try to make something of your team a little bit faster? What do you think their strategy is going to be here?
Well, first of all, Bryce Young hasn't thrown yet. So we haven't had a pro day workout from Bryce Young. It'll be interesting to see who the Panthers send to the Alabama pro day And also with those pro day workouts, I'm sure Bryce Young will have the Alabama pro day. He may have his own pro day. We'll see if the Panthers work him out individually, because if the Panthers work him out individually, what will happen is Frank Reich will have him throw passes that are relevant to the offense he's going to implement. Okay. But I agree with you with the owner being involved, which the owner is very involved. The owner was involved, in the possibilities of getting Deshaun Watson. And he's made statements early on with the swing for the fences. I mean, I think Anthony Richardson more and more now becomes part of the conversation, the equation for the first pick of the draft. And, to me, I will never be a believer in that. Because of the fact that you talk about a developmental guy, I really think that Carolina got hurt last year, or maybe hurt's not the right word. They missed because if you remember, they took Matt Corral in the third round, and Matt Corral got injured early on and was gone for the season. I really would have liked to seen what would have happened if Corral was able to stay healthy and play down the stretch, just to see, if he was potentially the answer for them at the quarterback position, because Matt Corral showed a lot of terrific things at Mississippi. Everybody, including myself, thought that was a great pick for the franchise in the third round. And we may never know what Matt Corral is going to turn out to be, at least with the Carolina Panthers moving forward.
All right, this can be a good place now to have the quarterback conversation, right? So we talk about their strategy here. Talking to teams, Tony, you have a lot of sources. You talk to a lot of people. Has Richardson inched his way in front of Levis, you think, on most teams' boards as that upside quarterback because of the testing, or do you think it's a little evenly split still?
No, I think what happened is Levis has actually moved down. I think
that's what I'm saying. You think Richardson's moved past him?
Yeah,
right?
well, but again, it's not that Richardson has moved past him. It's as much a function of Levis going in the opposite direction.
I got you.
As it is, Richardson going out. First thing is, people talked about Levis as top 4 pick, maybe the first pick of the draft. You talk to people in the league, they never thought that about Levis. They thought his combine workout was not that good. They think that he's a guy who's too muscle bound. He's too stiff. They think that he needs a lot of work on his fundamentals, as does Anthony Richardson. They think that he is just really intent on showing off what a strong arm he has. Everybody knows he has a strong arm. So the combine workout didn't do anything to help Will Levis. And then there's also the fact that he refused to play in the Senior Bowl that we talked about at length on the show. So I think it's more a fact that Anthony Richardson, people will find out, is not as highly thought of in war rooms, in the scouting community, as people first thought. So yeah, I do believe that Richardson has has leapfrogged over Levis significantly, and is going to be in that conversation for the first pick with Carolina.
It's funny. It kind of brings me back to what you were just talking about, where last year around this time, people were talking about like Malik Willis as the top 10 pick. And me, you, and Eric, when we were doing our shows together, we kind of tried to dispel that, yeah, the 30-second YouTube clip is great, Twitter clip, Instagram clip, whatever, this unbelievable play. When you watch the actual tape, the guy, I mean, I'm not trying to kill Malik Willis, but he didn't really know how to play the position. He was still learning, right? He was a very raw player. And I think Richardson is further along than Malik Willis was. He's a better player, more physically gifted as well, higher level of play and all that stuff. But I think teams will at some point, Tony, maybe feel the same way where, Malik Willis went in the third round last year. Now that's not going to happen to Richardson. He's going to be a first-round pick. But I agree. I think teams who do more of the work and aren't going to be enraptured by those wow plays are probably going to be a little bit more, hesitant about a guy like that, despite the raw physical gifts.
That's why impetuous owners are a bad thing on draft day. Okay. You talk about, the owner being part of the equation, and an owner, and I'm not saying Tepper does this, but, we've seen in the past owners flying around on the private jets to scout players, owners at pro day workouts, and it never works out. Leave it to the football people. You brought Scott Fitter in for a reason. You brought in Frank Reich. Leave the decision to them. And I agree with you. Yeah, they need a quarterback. Obviously, they're going to take a quarterback with everything that they gave away. And remember, this isn't the first time, because they gave away a ton of draft capital to the New York Jets in order to trade for Sam Darnold. So this isn't the first time that they've done this. But you're right. I absolutely agree with you. That's why I've said all along that Anthony Richardson, in my opinion, is the prototypical boomer bust candidate in this year's draft. I mean, yeah, he could turn out to be a great franchise quarterback, that can carry a team for years and years. But he could also be a guy that breaks your heart. You could be a Jameis Winston type of player. And people say, well, you got to roll the dice. Well, the Carolina Panthers are rolling the dice, and they're giving away a lot of future draft capital, a lot of future picks, with the roll of the dice. And what happens is, if it doesn't work out, it's not that you just didn't work out with the player that you selected. You now lost all those picks, and you have multiple holes on your roster.
No, I'm with you, Tony. And look, I think when you take a look at that and when you break it down the way you do, when it comes to Anthony Richardson, I've made the Cam Newton comparison here before, but it's more like a physicality and a profile, right? Like they're both huge. They're physically gifted. Richardson's a better, faster runner than Newton. Newton was, I think, a more polished passer than Richardson was coming out. And I think the other big difference, dude, Cam Newton's like playing for national championships. He's a winner. Like, that dude won at every level. He was like, he's done a lot more from that perspective than Richardson has ever done. Now, did Newton maybe? It's not like Newton was playing at Alabama either. He's playing at Auburn. That's what to me, right? Exactly, against Alabama. Right. That to me is what the difference is with those two guys when you evaluate them. Cam Newton just simply was much more of an accomplished player coming out than he did so much more than Richardson's ever sniffed.
I'm one of those people that when it comes to quarterbacks, I believe you've got to look at the body of work. And the greater the body of work, the more successful the quarterback is going to be. These guys that start for a year or two and then enter the league, it usually doesn't work out for those guys. Trevor Lawrence was a winning, consistent quarterback, and he's one of a kind, granted, for 3 years at Clemson. You go back to Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning was a 4-year starter. Well, he was a part-time starter as a freshman at Tennessee. You've got to look at the body of work. And even if you're honest with yourself, even Anthony Richardson's body of work is not that good on the college level. He didn't carry that Florida team. They lost to Vanderbilt. You go back and watch the Florida State game, which they lost to Florida State, completed 33% of his passes, and the throws were all over the place. Yeah, he looks great in shorts and a T-shirt throwing the ball, but when there's 11 guys on the field and he's got to read the defense and he's got to find the safety and he's got to, he's got people breathing down his neck, it's a different story. That's why I believe. That's why I think he's a huge bust. He's got a huge bust factor here because there is no body. The body of work there is minimal, and what we've seen has not been off the chart successful at all.
Yeah, and look, and I think I almost don't want the Panthers to draft Richardson because I think they're going to feel a lot of pressure to play him right away because of what they gave up to get him. And he is not ready. Like he needs to have a full season on the bench watching. Look, can you run packages for him where you take advantage of athleticism and all that sort of stuff? Sure. But even, talking, listening to other guys who covered the draft, like we do, Tony, Dane Brugler reported this over the weekend that talking to NFL teams, they're like, it's, you sit down with him in these meetings and there's a lot he just doesn't know because he hasn't played a lot. What was he, have 13 starts in his career or something like that? It's just not a lot of football, which is why, and I think I'm probably a little bit higher on, Will Levis than you are, Tony. But I think at least when you look at it, he started for 2 years. His tape this year was rough. It was not good. Now, the talent around him was bad. He played injured the whole year with some serious stuff. He changed. The offensive coordinator got changed on him. You go back to his 2021 tape. There's stuff on there that you're like, all right, look, like he moved the ball against Georgia. Like he did a nice job in that Georgia game against a really good Georgia team 2 years ago. So I do think there's a little bit more there, but I think both guys are probably not ready at the NFL level to step in and play right away. And Richardson even more so than Levis.
You say if you draft Richardson, you got to sit him for a year. I absolutely agree with you. Now, there are some people that say, well, he doesn't have experience. The way he's going to get better is by inserting him in the lineup.
That's true too.
More serious. Is it though? If he's your opening day starter, you could ruin him.
No, that's true.
I understand playing him, but if you want to piecemeal him in, if you want to put him in at the end of the games, I wouldn't start him. Have him be your starting quarterback in September or October. You want to put him in the second half. You want to put him in. Listen, the fact is this: the curve is so much steeper in the NFL from college compared to college football in so many ways. And I'm going to just talk about the speed on the field. I'm talking about the learning curve. I'm talking about the meetings that you go to. I'm talking about the conditioning. Everything, the curves are so much steeper on the NFL level than they are on the college level. I mean, it's so much information being thrown at you, and it's the ability to absorb and understand and use that information. I can understand why people want Anthony Richardson to play, his first year in the league. I just think that if you start him, if you expect him to be your opening day starter, it could lead to ruin.
Yeah, look, I agree. And I think it's problematic. So then we're talking, Tony, about either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. And, we talked about this briefly in our combine review. I was also impressed with CJ Stroud with his throwing session at the combine. I thought he was smooth. He was accurate. He threw a nice ball. I expected all that. I mean, if you watch him on tape, we talked about it. He's the most accurate. His accuracy is his greatest strength. He doesn't have a cannon, but I thought his deep ball actually impressed me more than I thought it would at the combine. He actually threw a really nice deep ball, showed a real good arm strength. But he has touch. He throws a good ball. He spins it. He's accurate. Like, I know people like, oh, he was great. I kind of, off the tape, I thought he was going to do that. That's what that's his strength at Ohio State. Like, people don't think about him this way, but he should. CJ Stroud is like an old school NFL pocket passer. Like, that's what he is. That's what he does. He's a technician back there. He's an accurate thrower. So to me, I wouldn't move him up a lot based on what he did at the combine, because I expected that. That's what I already knew about the guy. You know what I mean?
And again, he's not immobile. As we saw in that Georgia game, he can get outside the pocket. And to be redundant, I mean, which CJ Stroud are we going to get at the next level? Are we going to get the CJ Stroud we saw against Georgia in the semifinal game? Are we going to get the CJ Stroud we saw the prior year against Utah in the Rose Bowl? Or are we going to get the CJ Stroud that we saw, during most of the year in 2022, which the team started slow? The CJ Stroud, which basically failed 2 years in a row horribly against Michigan, a good Michigan defense. And again, I thought myself with CJ Stroud, I agree with you. And we said this before, the combine is set up for a guy like CJ Stroud. I didn't think his deep passes, they were nice. I didn't think they were all that accurate. I expected more accuracy. He did hit the wire on one of those throws for the
Sky
camera.
cam.
It was kind of actually funny. But again, I don't know how much of it was the problems that CJ Stroud had at Ohio State were his versus the Ohio State coaching staff overcoaching him. Because as I've said time and time again, he'd be up at the line of scrimmage, he'd be in the pocket, and he's looking at the sidelines, and the play clock is ticking down, 6, 5, 4, and he's waiting for direction rather than letting CJ Stroud play. That semifinal game against Georgia, they let him play, and he was brilliant. That's the CJ Stroud that I think, that's the one we're going to get. That's the one I hope we're going to get. But again, everything, we talk about Anthony Richardson's, body of work. CJ Richardson only played 2 years. He was more successful on the college level.
CJ Stroud.
He had a lot more talent in front of him and around him than Anthony Richardson, but he still only has a 2-year body of work, although he did a solid job at Ohio State.
Yeah, look, and I'll just say this too, and I'm not one to scout the helmet. What a previous player did has nothing to do with the current player, but you brought it up in your last answer, Tony. The Ohio State offensive system scares me a little bit. It's just not an NFL. That's not a system you can run the NFL, where you basically sit back there and your wide receivers who are better than everyone else, run around and get open, and you just sit there and you wait. Like, that's not what the NFL is. So I wonder what the learning curve is going to be for him going from that Ohio State system to the NFL. For him as well. And then finally, let
me just say one thing on that.
Yeah, please go ahead.
What bothered me was, he was just zoned in on a few receivers. He rarely used the tight end the last 2 years, even though he had a real good one in 2021, Jeremy Ruckert. You go back, and we talked about this last year. Basically, Chris Olave was the forgotten man in the 2021 offense, going to Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, and we saw what a good receiver is, what a good receiver Chris Olave is. Now, again, I don't know if that's a play design. I don't know if that's something where he's not looking around to see all the receivers, but yeah, that has to be a concern.
Yeah, look, I'm with you 100%. Finally, Bryce Young. Look, I'm still a Bryce Young guy. If I'm picking first, that's the guy I'm picking. I know the size scares people. I get it. I'd be a little scared too. And look, weighing in at 204 pounds, whatever. No one believes he's actually 204 pounds, and that's fine. But look, he can play football, and I don't know why a team would have to wait to watch him at his pro day. I've seen enough. If I don't see that guy throw again before the combine, before the draft, I don't care. Whatever. I know what he can do. I've seen it in games. So I guess talk about Bryce, and then if you had to guess right now, Tony, who do you think the Panthers do take with that first pick?
Well, I think right now I'm going to say C.J. Stroud, though Anthony Richardson's in the conversation. Getting back to Bryce Young, I think what happens with the pro days, what happens with the one-on-one workouts is the teams will ask the quarterback to throw certain passes that are relevant to the system that they implement to see if he can throw those types of passes. That's what teams want to see. I completely agree with you. I mean, if Bryce Young was 2 inches taller, 3 inches taller, and 15 pounds heavier, we're talking about a guy who's graded higher than Trevor Lawrence.
That's Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence territory. That's where we're at.
And don't tell me about the talent around Alabama, because this year he did not have the same offensive line in front of him as he did in 2021. He didn't have a fraction of the weapons at his disposal, and he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And that is my type of quarterback. I am willing to give up arm strength for a guy that gets it between the ears.
Me too.
Guy who's clairvoyant, and that's what Bryce Young is. There's a few people said, "Oh, Houston made a mistake. They should have tanked," which is ridiculous. You're not tanking in the NFL to get that first pick. I think Houston's fine where they're at. If they like C.J. Stroud, they'll get C.J. Stroud because he goes to the Panthers. They're going to get Bryce Young. And again, regardless of whatever team takes him, Bryce Young, you've got to protect him. You've got to make sure there are players in front of him that can keep him upright, because he's not going to be able to take the beating on Sunday that he took against Tennessee in that game and constantly pull himself off the field and get back into the huddle.
All right, so before we say goodbye here, we're going to be a little shorter today because this is a big free agency week, and a lot of needs and stuff are going to change based on free agency. We don't get too deep into all that. We'll do that next week. We'll react to everything that happened in terms of teams needs with free agency. So, Tony, let's get into this one last topic before we go. And you kind of touched on your last answer. What, in your opinion, is the impact of this trade on what happens now after the first pick in the draft?
And yeah, it's a good question, because now obviously there's going to be one less quarterback available after the Houston Texans pick, right? Because we thought that Chicago was going to take one of the two defensive players, Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. I think the impact can only be really known when we find out what the situation with Jalen Carter, what happens legally with Jalen Carter, because that will determine how far he falls. Are the Raiders going to take a quarterback with that pick? Are the Raiders going to take Will Levis? I mean, there's likely to be a quarterback available to the Raiders. Are they going to take a quarterback? Are they going to go with an offensive lineman? So I think the Raiders are probably not too happy, because they're not going to have their pick of quarterbacks, because there's going to be one less quarterback on the board. I mean, maybe that's where Will Levis goes if Josh McDaniel feels he could work with him. But again, I don't think it really affects that many teams, because after Carolina, after Houston, after the Raiders, how many other teams are looking for a quarterback in the top 10?
Well, Colts, and I think
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay, but I think that's the team to touch on here, right? Because you're right. The Texans will get whatever guy they like that the Panthers don't pick now. So there's two teams I think this impacts. You mentioned the Raiders; they might now have to move up. But someone might not get to them, right? So the Cardinals now are sitting with the lottery ticket, right? They're the first team that doesn't need a quarterback now that has a draft pick. So does a team want to get in front of Indianapolis here to go get that quarterback before the Colts pick? Do the Colts want to move up so they can at least get the third quarterback and not wait for the fourth one at number 4? I think that's fascinating now. What do the Cardinals do, who have an injury at quarterback? They're not going to try to win this year. They're in rebuild mode. Do they try to turn that third pick? Now, you're not going to get the assets that the Bears got for the Panthers for the first overall pick, but do the Cardinals now try to auction off that pick so a team can go get the quarterback they want at 3 if they're still on the board? And does that have to wait until draft day? Because you don't know who's going off 1-2.
I apologize to Cole fans. Completely zoned out on that one. Listen, the last time we had 3 quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, it was Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and Trey Lance. So, the Niners made a big move for Trey Lance, and for whatever reason, he's not worked out. I think obviously the Cardinals are likely going to shop that pick to get more draft capital. Again, it's all in the eye of the beholder. I mean, what do teams think of that third quarterback? Are they willing to give away a lot? Or are they willing to give away picks to move up to get that third quarterback? If it's me, the answer is no. But I'm not in a position to make those decisions, and I'm not running a team that needs a quarterback. So I think it makes sense that Carolina is going to start to shop that pick. We'll just see how desperate teams are to move up and get one of the quarterbacks, if in fact they are that desperate.
Do you think Jim Irsay is really annoyed right now? I mean, you got to imagine you're the Colts. At least 2 quarterbacks are gone now when you're picking at 4, maybe a third if the Cardinals do trade for a team. What do you do now if you're in Indianapolis?
Is he annoyed? I mean, it works both ways. Remember, they made the trade down with the Jets, so the Jets could trade Sam Darnold, move up to get Sam Darnold, and they got a great offensive lineman. So, I think there's something to be said for waiting for the draft to come to you and then take it from there. Is he upset? They got a new quarterback coach in there, so I'm sure he feels that whatever. And the quarterback coach worked wonders with a guy that was selected late in the second round. So I don't. Is Irsay irked? He's probably irked about a lot of things. Jim Irsay. But is he irked about this? I don't. If he's smart, leave it to the football people. Just let the football people worry about it, and sign the checks.
Hey, look, but Chris Ballard's trying to save his job here, right,
That's
Tony?
it.
I mean, he really is. So
This
is going to be a big decision for him now. Does he move up to 3? Does he stay at 4? And the last thing you want to do is to just say, "Oh, we need a quarterback. We'll pick the one that's left." If you don't believe in the guy, that's going to sabotage the whole thing from the beginning.
The amazing thing about Ballard is Ballard has had so much success in the draft at other positions and other areas, but the quarterback spot has been a sore spot for him. After Phillip Rivers, it's been a disaster for the Colts. So you're right about that. I mean, I don't know that they got to win right away, but they got to get somebody behind center that shows that they've got some longevity and that they are the player of the future.
Yeah, they really do. And then again, the Seahawks at 5. That Geno Smith deal, you can get out after 1 year. Do they wanted to I think that would be a great spot. Like if a team that would actually fit with Richardson,
Absolutely.
It's the Seahawks.
Absolutely.
You can even let Geno start 2 years if you want, and then you slide Richardson in. Like that to me, and even Levis, you could put Levis there too. He can sit a year and then you could figure it out. That to me is a good spot for those guys because there's no pressure for the quarterback to step in and play right away.
And that Geno Smith is going to be a great mentor. Geno Smith has had an up and down NFL career. I'm glad to see that he's had some success. But Geno Smith is a genuine guy. He's not going to be a guy that whines and complains if they draft a quarterback early on. He's going to go out there and show what he can do, and he's going to be a good mentor. So I agree with you. I thought all along with that second pick in the first round, if they signed Geno Smith, that would be a good spot for Anthony Richardson. That looks like it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
it might have to be the first round, I should say.
Yeah, it might have to be number 5. I mean, it's crazy if they do it. All right, Tony, I guess before we say goodbye, any other draft thoughts top of mind here as we head into free agency week?
Yeah, I mean, with free agency, the draft takes a back seat with all the free agency craziness, and it's understandable because what we see happen the next week is going to dictate where teams may shift their draft boards. Because if they're able to fill a need at left tackle, if they're able to fill a need at receiver, if they're able to fill a need at cornerback, you can scratch that off as far as being a need on draft day.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that all week. Stay tuned. We'll cover it right here on all of our podcasts here on the Giants Podcast Network. Big Blue Kickoff Live, Giants Huddle, all that great stuff if you're a Giant fan. If you're just tuning in for draft coverage, we'll be back next week. Probably early next week. We'll try to do Monday or Tuesday next week, and we'll get really a feel for how the draft landscape has changed with free agency. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of veteran trades too, maybe some more draft trades as well over the next week. And we have pro days too that I know Tony is tracking fastidiously that we'll have all the updates on. You like that one? Coming up next week on draft season. For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see everybody next time.